Hello, everybody, and welcome back to OMB Reviews. I am the critic who is a cynic. Hope you're doing well. Today we're doing a box office preview for this upcoming weekend, which sees Inside Out 2 projected to get $135 million in its global opening, much of that coming from the domestic market. And some are saying, including Tony and Nance over on Deadline, that this is the rebound of the summer. Is the summer of 2024 making a comeback? Is this going to be the box office event of the year? I have my doubts about that. I think that that's probably still going to be Deadpool and Wolverine when everything is said and done. But let's just be honest here. The numbers are looking pretty good, at least for the Inside Out 2 film premiere, though it is definitely not looking as good as what the last film made, despite the lies and the spins that people in the mainstream media will try to tell you, because ultimately, remember, just because you're making more money in so-called pre-sales at this point in time versus another film almost 9 years ago, that does not mean that it is the same number of tickets being sold, especially when you account for a little thing called inflation, especially when you take into account the changes in ticket prices. So even though there might be a higher number in pre-sales now for Inside Out 2, does not mean that there are more people going to see it. And based on these projections right here, we can actually prove that point. And so we'll talk about that. We'll also talk about the second weekend numbers being projected right now for Bad Boys. Was it Bad Boys Ride or Die? I get the names a little bit confused. And we'll talk about all of these things. Before we get any further, please make sure you smash that like button, light up that fire button over on Odyssey, and smash the rumble button as well. Also, make sure that you're subscribed to the channel with that bell notification on. That way you know every time a video, a live stream, goes live on the channel. So Tony and Nance back at it once again over on Deadline, saying Inside Out 2 eyes, right? This global opening of summer box office rebound. After the overperformance of Sony's Bad Boys Ride or Die, summer's big wheels keep on a-turnin' for Disney Pixar's Inside Out 2, and it's looking at what could be the biggest stateside opening of the year. Is that what you think, Tony? Is that really what you think? Let's just be honest here. I think that at this point in time, there is a lot more actual hype going on for Deadpool and Wolverine than there is for Inside Out 2. You can talk about your pre-sales all you want. Pre-sales, as I've said before, are a bit of fool's gold, right? They've talked about pre-sales for a lot of films, and sometimes it actually does not actually end up panning out being a good sign, because it does not ever account for walk-up traffic. That's the reason why you might say, hey, I'm going to see a movie. How many people are going to see this in the theater? Oh, it's only got 5 people in there. You show up there, and then there's 10 to 20. Because walk-up people typically will buy their tickets on the actual day. There's still a lot of people that do this, and that's the one thing that pre-sales can never truly account for. That being said, I think based off of what we have right now with this sequel to Inside Out, a very successful film back in 2015, now getting a sequel in 2024, not necessarily a sequel that people were wanting right now. It probably would have been smarter to do this quicker to the point. Obviously, I'm at the point also with Disney where I'm just so tired of prequels, sequels, and unoriginal storytelling, though apparently based on early reviews, this is a return to form for Pixar, so I guess that's a good thing for them financially speaking. But with all that being said, these numbers here are definitely a positive sign. It goes on to say that $85 million is what they are projecting for the film domestically, whereas they're expecting a $50 million take in the international market. Now, I will say, based off of these numbers here, it seems that this is likely what the studio is saying, right? That they're projecting around an $85 million opening, because that seems to be a little bit more on the lower side. They're probably projecting that just in case the wheels fall off, just in case things go crazy. So that way they can go back and say, well, we only expected it to do $85 million anyway. But also with the, I think, much more likely chance it does better than $85 million, that then means, oh yeah, the film overperformed, it overprojected. So what are some of the other people saying about the projections for the film? Let's first off go to Box Office Theory, and over there, Box Office Theory is projecting the film to get around $108.4 million, so quite a lot higher than that $85 million being projected. Remember that Box Office Theory uses a different metric than what typical standards are being used. I think that some of the things that they will use are social media engagements, general sentiments, things like that, in order to try to calculate what the actual word of mouth effect is going to be. Sometimes it works really well. The guy who runs this site was very key in being one of the only sites to correctly predict the massive opening weekend for Barbie last year, when a lot of other sites were under projecting what the film actually ended up making. But again, sometimes they're right, sometimes they're wrong. In this case, I think I would, if I had to put money on anybody, I'd put money on Box Office Theory and not on Tony and Nance. And I'm sure if you've watched my channel for a while now, you probably know why. $108.4 million, again, seems like a pretty good opening. Over $100 million domestic opening, that seems pretty strong. That would mean if that $50 million international projection being given by Deadline is true, then the film is going to open to over $150 million worldwide, if that actually holds. Going to Box Office Pro, right now, they are projecting a range between $85 and $115 million. So probably pretty similar metrics here to what was being said over on Box Office Theory. There are obviously a lot of connections between those two sites. The guy who runs Box Office Theory used to work at Box Office Pro for many, many years, was a big part of their charting. And since he's left, they no longer really do the charts like they used to actually take care of. Now, here is one of the most interesting things about all of this, though, because some are saying, hey, aren't you trying to crap on their parade? No, look. Right now, the projections are looking really, really good for this movie, right? Over $100 million domestic opening. That is a good thing, right? That is a good thing for a film that cost $200 million to make, a film that likely needs to make $500 million just to break even, if not more, because, again, a lot of that money that they're going to be making is probably also going to be coming from those international markets, meaning they get a lot less of the change there. So it's got a long way to go to actually break even. But we also have to keep in mind here that these numbers, in comparison to the original film back in 2015, are not all that great. Let's go ahead and show you why that is the case. So here's a comparison between Inside Out 2015 and Inside Out 2024, okay? When you adjust for inflation, the budgets are pretty similar, right? When you adjust the inflation, the $175 million posted budget for Inside Out 2015, that then in today's dollars would be $227 million. Today, we have Inside Out 2 being told to us, right? So this number could also change. We know that Disney sometimes hides numbers. Sometimes the projections or the initial estimates are a lot lower than initially thought, especially once tax returns, things like that start coming out. But let's assume for a moment that the film has a $100 million opening, right, for the 2024 release. Well, if it does get to $100 million, it's still below the adjusted for inflation $117 million, right? The first film made around $90 million back in 2015. In today's dollars, that would be around $117 million. So this film would already be tracking behind that movie. A much more interesting number, though, especially for those that get triggered by things like inflation, is the average ticket sales. So the opening weekend for the first film, for Inside Out, back in 2015, sold an estimated 10.7 million tickets in its opening weekend, right? So we take into account that the average ticket price back in 2015 was around $8.43, and the average ticket price today about $13, $14, depending on where you are. And so if, therefore, Inside Out 2 opens to $100 million, it means it gets 7.6 million tickets. So we're talking about a pretty stark drop from 10 million tickets, but obviously we have seen much worse drops this year and the last couple of years, especially for franchise players. And so we could definitely argue that this is a marginal drop, but still a drop nonetheless. And still, I would say, sizable enough for them to have some concerns, right? Because you look at the first Inside Out movie, the film, on paper, right, did very, very well, made over 4 times its budget. But if this film is tracking behind that movie, and that film made 4 times or a little over 4 times its budget, if this movie is only getting to maybe 3 times its budget because of how much the difference is between the two as far as total numbers are concerned, and how much is tracking behind those numbers, guess what? That means the potential of it actually making profit, breaking even, becomes a lot less. And that's the reason why I'm mentioning that now, because we don't know yet. We don't know what the actual numbers are going to be. If I had to put money on it, I would say $100 million sounds about right to me. Now, let's say that somehow the rails fall off. Like, let's say these projections are completely off base. Let's say parents are like, you know what, screw Disney. I have no faith in them anymore. Could happen. And I think that a lot of people probably still feel that way. Also, a lot of people thinking, hey, yeah, probably just wait for this to come out on Disney Plus. Even though they might be saying, you know, Disney is saying that they're going to try to keep this thing theatrical for as long as they can. But let's assume. Right? That's what we do here. We like to make some projections. So if it comes in at that low end of $85 million, that means it would only be selling around 6.5 million tickets. So that would be quite a large drop-off from the first film, going from 10.7 to 6.5, right? We're talking about a difference of $4 to $5 million there. That's a pretty stark difference. Now, on the flip side of that, though, let's say it overperforms. People talk about Bad Boys for Life, or Bad Boys Ride or Die overperforming last weekend. Let's say that it overperforms, gets closer to that $115 million. Even then, even if it overperforms and gets that high-end projection of $115 million domestic, right? That would mean it still comes in, 1, underneath the film from 2015, and 2, still about 2 million tickets less than what the 2015 film did. And that difference could ultimately be the deciding factor on whether the film is able to make its money back or not, or at the very least, the number and the amount of profits the film is going to be able to make. Keep in mind, Disney had no films last year that made any money. Every single film that they released last year from all the various studios they own and projects and IPs they own lost money. And many of them lost big money. Right? They've been operating at a loss theatrically for a very, very long time now, especially since the age and especially since the dawn of COVID, right? Because of the way that they responded by putting things on the streaming services, the fact that the quality of their films dropped precipitously, the fact that they were banking on audiences just showing up for the sake of it, and also the fact that they put films that were actually a lot better than just being straight to streaming. Films like Soul, for instance, which I actually found to be quite entertaining, and I've not seen Luca, but I've heard a lot of people say good things about it. Putting those things behind the paywall of Disney Plus and not in theaters, I think also probably had a negative impact because it pushed people to say, hey, guess what? I don't have to actually go out to a theater to go see these movies. I don't actually have to spend the hundreds upon hundreds of dollars sometimes that families have to spend to go see a movie, to pay for popcorn and for drinks and all of those things in between. Right? That is how Disney has now trained a lot of these families. So you have that factor. You have the fact that they decided to get involved in politics. We saw this especially happen when the film Lightyear came out. Remember, that film was a massive flop, and that's from a massive IP, right? A film about Buzz Lightyear from the Toy Story franchise. I mean, come on. For that film to be a flop, a lot of bad things had to be going on there, and that was around the time that Disney had, again, gotten involved in Florida politics, had gotten some mainstream attention, and I think that that has definitely impacted the view that people have of Disney, not to mention the fact that there have been plenty of reports coming out, videos coming out of them talking about how they want to indoctrinate your children. Add all of that to the fact that they're still doing that in many ways with other properties. For instance, the most recent Acolyte episode from Star Wars, right, on Disney Plus. It is filled with some of the most insane things that one could ever possibly see, and it's not for children in any way. This, however, again, as I said, early reviews are saying right now that this is a pretty non-political movie. Right? Other than some of the makeup of the hockey team, apparently, that she plays for. Apparently, it's a very diverse hockey team, so there's a lot of things to be said there. But as far as the movie itself, apparently, it doesn't really go into a lot of the other things that were being pushed in some of the other films or some of the ideas that were being pushed around. So it sounds like that's probably going to be to its benefit. And so if it's able to at least get some medium to positive reviews, right now it seems to be in that way, that positive word of mouth, guess what? That Saturday, Sunday morning audience especially is going to probably show up in pretty strong numbers for this movie. People have been probably waiting for this film because the first film is actually pretty good. I myself still very much enjoy that film. But if that high-end number is reached 115, that still is 2 million tickets less. And so let's go back to where I think it'll probably be closer to $100 million domestic if I had to guess. That's 7.6 million tickets. So again, we're still talking about 3 million plus tickets less than the original film. So if you were to take into account that fact, it's 30% essentially behind where the last film was. And so if that number continues, right, if it continues to track domestically, internationally, 30% behind that last film, that could be the difference, right? That could be the ultimate difference into whether or not the film makes money or not. The last film, as I mentioned, 4.5, I believe, was the number right there. We'll go ahead and do it live because we love doing things live here on OMB Reviews because I try to keep myself as honest as I possibly can be. I'm a numbers guy. Obviously, I have my own thoughts and my own opinions, and I put those in when I can. But at the same time, I also try to let the numbers speak for themselves. And so we go back to Inside Out in 2015, the film made $850 million worldwide. So not a billion-dollar film, but still pretty successful nonetheless. It made 4.9 times its budget. So if the film right now is tracking 30% behind 4.9, again, I think that would still be enough for it to hit its break even. I think it would still be enough for it to also be able to make profit. But I will say right now, based on the numbers that we have, this is not going to be as profitable for Disney as the first film was. And when it comes down to it, you want your films not only to make their money back, not only to make profit, but to also pay for future projects. Whereas this film was able to make its money back and to pay for future projects, the current one, right now, based on the tracking, I don't think that is actually going to be able to happen. That's just my own opinion. We'll see when the numbers actually stand out, but we've seen this trend continue on almost every single week, where every time there's a new film in a franchise coming out. Let's take last week, for instance. We'll talk about that also with Bad Boys Ride or Die. Right now, the projections are that it's going to drop around 50%. So for a film that costs as much as this movie did, hey, that's actually not that bad. That's actually a pretty strong hold. It's going to get through $100 million domestic by the end of this weekend. So a 50% hold there would be pretty darn good for that. 28.3 million is what's being projected by Box Office Theory. Let us see if Box Office Pro has any any projections there. 28 to 35 million dollars is what's being projected for that film. So obviously 16% of the market share versus 34% for Inside Out 2, just to show you how dominant Inside Out 2 is expected to be. I'll actually be going to see the film tonight, so I'll be able to give you my actual thoughts on the movie. We'll talk about that. I might be able to get a video out there. If not, as I always say, when it comes to my movie reviews, I do put all of them over on criticlist.com, and you can check out my profile over there for that. But let's just, again, take into account Bad Boys Ride or Die. Remember, this film overprojected, overperformed, right? It did better than projections were originally indicating. However, the film itself is still not quite matching up to what we saw with the film that came out in 2020. All right, let's go ahead and see these numbers. $123 million worldwide is currently where the film stands. That's pretty darn good, especially in 2024. But it's still 1.2 times its budget. In a world and in a time when it's going to need to make probably closer to 3 times its budget to break even, it still has a ways to go. And though one could argue there's not going to be a whole lot of competition for the film in that specific phase as an R-rated movie, the R rating, the fact that it is the time that it is right now, and the fact that it is indeed going against and going behind the last Bad Boys film, I do think are factors that need to be taken into account. So let's go ahead and do a like-for-like comparison between these two movies, okay? So up until just this past Wednesday, this is the first time that the new film, Ride or Die, has actually done better in the daily number versus the film from 2020. So Bad Boys for Life made $4.3 million on its first Wednesday, whereas Bad Boys Ride or Die made $4.7 million when you adjust for inflation. At the same point of release, $74 million for Ride or Die, $97 million for Bad Boys for Life. So Bad Boys for Life, by the end of the week, was before the second weekend, was already at $100 million domestic, right? By the first Thursday, it had gotten to that point. It's going to take a few more days for Bad Boys Ride or Die to get to that same number and that same metric. So because of the fact that it is tracking behind in that way, doesn't seem to be having the same impact internationally, at least at this point in time. I think we could probably guess that it's going to make maybe half, a little more than half of what the last film made. Maybe $30 million is on the table. We'll have some firm projections after the second weekend numbers come in. And again, that would mean that this film is going to be coming in still quite below, quite underneath where that last film was. But with a $100 million budget, that still would be potentially enough. $30 million would be potentially enough to make its money back. Again, I'll give more projections on that when we get into our box office breakdown, when we get those official week 2 numbers in. The point being made, though, is it's tracking behind, and we've seen this happen. And the fact that Inside Out 2 is also tracking behind with a film that costs $100 million more at least is, I think, something for Disney to still be concerned about. Because even though they're going to get a lot of positive headlines from Tony and Nance in the mainstream shill media, and we've seen this happen over and over and over again, that is not going to change the fact that the numbers are what they are. That they have to be able to perform as well, if not better, than some of those previous releases because of where they're making their money today. When they decided to put a lot of their things into streaming, to more quickly put their movies onto streaming, they had to change their relationships with theaters. They had to change their contracts. And that means they're not getting as much money as they once did before. Again, on average right now, 55% of the entire domestic box office by the end of a film's run actually goes to the studios, 45% going to the theaters. It's about 40% for the studios internationally, and about 25% if they have a release in China. The other going to the Chinese Communist Party in China, and then internationally, the others going to those countries and to the theaters in those countries and the different relationships that they have in those countries. The point being made is this. Inside Out 2 has a good chance of getting to $100 million domestic in its opening weekend. That is going to be a very, very good opening for it, but it's still going to be a far cry from where it was in 2015. It still has a long way to go. Disney has a long, long way to go in order to rebuild itself. And there have actually already been some reports of some saying, hey, guess what? Disney clearly is going in the right track with the recent moves to focus more on specific content. And I think to myself, those were only recently announced over the last few months, and these have been projects in works for years. So if you're trying to say this is a sign that the changes at Disney are working, I'm sorry, but I guess I got a bridge to sell you to somewhere because you are not paying attention in that case. Go check out Valiant Renegade. Go check out WW Pro if you want to see even more analysis of just the financial backside, the financial problems going on with Disney especially with these mindsets. But right now, the main point, Inside Out 2, $100 million projected opening, domestic, over $150 million probably internationally if it holds that domestic total. This obviously could do a lot higher than that too. We could see this film do over $115 million. And if the film is able to get even higher, if the film is able to get closer to what the first film made, not only in raw totals, but also in raw ticket sales, the chances of it being able to be as successful or being a huge success become that much better. Is the film on pace to be $1 billion film? At this point, I would say no. At this point, because of where it's currently tracking, if it's tracking around 30% behind domestically where the first film was, if that, again, difference holds between the two, right now, there's not a lot to say that that won't happen because it's happened in almost every franchise where these films have been tracking behind, even the ones that we've liked have been tracking behind a lot of these other ones. That spells some danger for them down the line. We'll have the full analysis of all of this when we actually get the numbers on Sunday, and I will give my full analysis then. But what are y'all's thoughts on these numbers, right? If the film is able to get to $150 million, typically a film makes around 30% of its entire box office worldwide in its opening worldwide weekend. So theoretically, then, that would mean the film's chances of getting to $450 to $500 million would very much be likely and on the table. But if that is the case, that's bumping up right to its break even. And if you remember the fact that it might have to make more than that because of where things are financially, yeah, there's no guarantee that this film is going to be a hit or a success. Even if it does have a $100 million opening, it's still going to have a long way to go before it breaks even and makes profit. And we'll continue to cover this, and we'll continue to call out Tony and Nance because I'm sure that they will try to run with it no matter what the number ends up being, as being the biggest number ever, and oh man, Disney is back. If you saw the recent Acolyte episode, you know Disney is not anywhere near being close to back. This just might be one of their better performing films and might actually make money back. Whereas last year, they had no films make their money back. So, hey, maybe they're finally on to something? We'll have to wait and see. What are y'all's thoughts? Let me know in the comment section down below. Do you plan on seeing this film? Do you think the film is going to make its money back? Do you think the film is going to get to $100 million domestic? I think it's very likely. I think that it seems to be tracking in that direction. It seems like that is probably going to be a pretty successful weekend. I still think, though, that Deadpool Wolverine probably will have the biggest opening of the summer just because of how much hype is around that movie. Whereas this film, there's not a lot of hype around it, but we also know that families like to show up to what seem to be family-friendly films. We've seen this happen with other movies, especially Illumination has taken advantage of that in the places where Disney has fallen behind. So what are y'all's thoughts? Let me know in the comment section down below. If you like this video, smash that like button, light up that fire button, honestly, smash the rumble button as well. You guys are all amazing and beautiful people. Have a wonderful rest of your day. And as always, God bless. And now for a huge special shout out to all of my Patreon, Subscribe Star, Locals, and YouTube members who are at the Chosen of Valhalla level. Starting off with my Patreon supporters, Father Luca Illick, Rosetta Allen, check out her YouTube channel, which is Eagle Rider, and Miss Martin Muses, check out her YouTube channel by the same name. To my Subscribe Star Chosen members, Matt317, check out his Twitch channel by the same name, and also the K-Man, check him out at xtheboundaries.co, and a shout out also to my one Chosen of Valhalla YouTube member, Mr. Roy. Thank you again for being so much of a huge supporter of the channel. And to every one of my chosen members, if you want your name shouted out at the end of every live stream and video, or if you want access to things like giveaways of Blu-rays, 4Ks, etc., and access to an exclusive podcast bonus material for members, check out the links in the video description below for all of those details. You guys are amazing and beautiful people. Have a wonderful rest of your day, a blessed month of the Sacred Heart, and as always, God bless.